Hello, Counter-Strikers and class-based action shooters. My name is TVSky, and there's been a bit of a leak from Riot's upcoming Valorant, the thing they revealed as Project A during the 10-year celebration anniversary thing. Now, all we really have at this moment is some leaks from IGN. They accidentally left a website link up that had these screenshots on it, which immediately got posted to Twitter, even though they tried to take it down because of course they did. And we have this screenshot here, which I couldn't figure out where the hell the providence of this screenshot was, but given that this character appears, well, right here in this screenshot here, apparently it's legit. This is not the correct Twitter handle for Valorant, by the way. Valorant is Play Valorant on Twitter, as far as we can make out. It had a verified account up briefly that accidentally went live apparently too early and now is down again. Or has now been de-verified for a second, and which is probably going to be re-verified later today. And according to Slasher on Twitter, there's probably a press embargo that goes down around midnight tonight, so that's like in a matter of hours. So this information is only going to be new for so long, and once that comes out, maybe we'll do more of a follow-up video. But the reason why I wanted to talk about these screenshots is because we can already tell a lot about the visual art style and aesthetics that this particular game is going for. And I want to stress that if you want gameplay information, if you want like speculation about like hit scan things on weapons and recoil, and not me. I'm not the guy. Like the last time I played Counter-Strike was like before it was Counter-Strike 1.6. It was back when like the early 2000s in some net cafes screaming bad words at my friends across like a LAN setup. That's the last time I played Counter-Strike. I don't really have much of a connection to tactical shooters in the modern day. What I talk about is character design, aesthetics, lore, visuals, and all of that good stuff. And we can already tell a number of interesting things about the aesthetic direction this game is going in. And we'll talk about the level screenshots in a bit, but we'll start with this lady right here, because her character design and the character design of her possible compatriots, or maybe enemies, who knows how the lore is going to shake out, down here, informs us already a little bit about the aesthetic direction that this game wants to take, because the easy, obvious, open comparison that everyone's going to be making, which is entirely fair, is to Overwatch. Something which Riot have already themselves tried to get in front of by saying, it's a little bit like, maybe a little bit like Overwatch, but it's not quite like they've been trying very hard to massage the messaging to avoid being called directly an Overwatch clone. But aesthetically, there's a lot of that in there. Now, it does distinguish itself in a couple of interesting factors, but if you told me that this costume design right here, and by the way, that's a Shuriman Sundisk on her chest, and the game is called Valorant, like Valorant, League of Legends Valorant, so the lore nerds are going to be theory crafting the connection, like this is going to be Akali's great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter or something like that, who knows. So the lore nerds are theory crafting all of that nonsense already, but if you told me that this costume belonged to an Overwatch character, I'd be like, oh, did they release a new one? Or is this a skin that I haven't seen? I wouldn't have any trouble believing you because it falls very much into that same general set of aesthetic principles. Like you have these like large shapes of color, very sort of simple, recognizable, and like this blend of sci-fi and fantasy aesthetics. Like you have the futuristic looking shoulder pads and the belt buckles and stuff like that. And then you also have, how many belts does this lady need, by the way? Then you also have this knotted belt across the waist and these long sleeves. And you have these green jade looking sort of glowy mystical orbs, which as far as I can make out from this is how she uses her ability: slow orb, healing orb, resurrection. So she's kind of a Zenyatta Mercy mix. And that tells us something about the aesthetic universe that the game is trying to craft, which is one that, much like Overwatch, is also, like Overwatch, as a lot of people probably know, is a game, and I'm playing Overwatch music entirely intentionally right now. Overwatch, as a lot of people probably know, is a game that was originally designed to be essentially an MMO, where they were sort of trying, okay, let's take all the archetypes from fantasy games, like healers and mages and stuff like that, and turn them into something sci-fi-ish. So you have like characters like Mercy, who is literally the white mage, the healer, but she's given like tech implements with which she does this stuff instead of magic. And Moira, who's perhaps one of the most obvious mage airsats in that particular game. This is going for something along the similar lines of an aesthetic, and that kind of translates even into the world design, where we have these worlds that are like, oh yeah, this is Middle Eastern, that might be real Arabic, actually, for all I know. Probably not. Where we have this mix of like old-timey classical sort of throwback aesthetics and then very modern aesthetics jammed up right against that. So you have that constant contradiction between the sort of fantasy aesthetics and the modern aesthetics. Like this dude just in streetwear right over here, fighting against like this lady who seems to be wearing the robe of some ancient monastic order of some kind over a turtleneck. So that tells us something about what the aesthetic direction they're going in. But to allay some of the comparisons to Overwatch a little bit, one way in which this game tries to distinguish itself a little bit, as far as I can tell, from Overwatch is in how it constructs the faces of the characters and the bodies in general. Like, there's a little bit more detail if you look at the lady's hand here. That's a little bit more of a detailed rendering than you would see on an Overwatch character, at least in my opinion, but especially in the faces. Like, Overwatch's faces, and especially on the women, are highly, like, ultra stylized. Really just completely illustrative, very stylized. What Project A, Valorant, seems to be doing instead is, again, similar direction, but pulling back a little bit. Holding a little bit more towards, okay, let's go with something that's a little bit more realistically proportioned, like in terms of how the nose and the mouth and the eyes are proportioned. A little bit less Saturday morning cartoonish. Not realistic, not gritty in any sense, but a little bit more towards something that looks more human in proportion. And that's a trend, even though these are illustrations, obviously, not the character models. That's something that seems to continue with the way that they construct the faces of other characters, especially if you look at this dude here, who looks a lot like Echo. I can hear the, like, Ash, Echo, that looks like a Gangplank. That could be like an Akali, or maybe that's a Jason. Oh god, that's Jin, isn't it? Like, the lore nerds are already doing this, I promise you. I'm doing it right now, you can hear me doing it. Anyway, this guy, especially you look at his face, like, where Overwatch would construct a face like that is, like, something that's a lot more simple, with a lot less subtle shading around the edges and stuff like that. So there is that little attempt to differentiate themselves. Now, I question whether it's different enough that most people won't go, oh, so it's an Overwatch clone the moment they see it. Because that was certainly my first reaction, is like, wow, that really looks like some low-budget Overwatch clone from China or something like that. But there are actually genuine distinct differences in the character design, and those differences extend into the map design as well, which is something that, like, people who are more familiar with like CS:GO maps and stuff like that can probably talk a lot more about, like, the architecture and layout of maps like these, with probably there's like bomb sites and corridors and terminology that I'm not fully cognizant of. But what I can see in terms of the way that the aesthetics of these levels is designed is it's kind of a meeting. My immediate reaction was, this sort of seems like the halfway point between Overwatch and Team Fortress 2. That was my immediate impression, because it brings from Team Fortress 2, like, this very boxy, sparse, like, layout aesthetic, and these very, like, you can see these very flat texture shadings, where, like, you can see there's a little bit of brickwork texturing here and there, very clear lines everywhere. And this is something that seems to carry over into all of the maps that we've seen so far. Like, you can just identify straight lines all over the place that give you really clear lines of, like, where you can stand, where you can move, where you can shoot, what you can hit. And there's really very little in terms of curves anytime they can avoid it. And especially in the screenshot here. One thing I'll point your attention to is, look at the distribution of detail in the environment. Plenty of, like, we've got the graffiti on the walls, we got the pallets over on the side, the little trolleys and stuff like that, and up on the ceiling, like, we've got wires going back and forth, we've got lines crisscrossing all over the place, like, we've got lines going that way, we've got lines going that way, we've got lines going up and down in the trusses of the roof. And then you look at the floor and it's like, oh, well, that's completely clean. And so there's a very utilitarian aesthetic being designed here, like one where it's like, you know exactly when you can shoot around a corner, is what it looks like. You know exactly where you can stand on this floor and where you can't. There isn't, like in Overwatch especially, for example, you'll have all this ornamentation on the ground. Like, you'll have, like, curbs, and you'll have stuff lying around, and you'll have, like, architecture and shaping going on. And Overwatch is still a very clean game, like a very clean looking game, but this is, like, completely Spartan in the way that they keep their floors very, very clean of, like, obstructions and jitter, and there aren't little bumps or hills. It's a completely flat, plain surface, and, like, very obvious architecture and layout. And that's something I suspect is good for tactical shooters. because it's certainly the kind of environment design that Counter-Strike also goes with. Like, I do watch CSGO esports every once in a while, and they also have this very clean, like lots of boxes, lots of squares, lots of very clean lines so that you know where you are, what you can do at all times. They also have that, but where Counter-Strike goes for these very highly detailed, gritty, realistic texturings. Like, they want this stuff to look like a relatively realistic environment, much more towards the Call of Duty aesthetic than anything else. Here we have these lots of flat color surfaces, like lots of these colors are very close to each other. So you have these you can if you squint a little, or if you unfocus your eye and you look at one of these screenshots, you can still kind of see where everything is. Like, you can still identify, okay, there's this block of boxes here that's different from this block of thing here, and there's an opening right there. You can see that because of the different color there, and there's like a big block here, and then there's this thing in the way here, which is, this thing is clearly not part of that. Like, even when you unfocus your eye and really blur stuff out, you can still tell more or less where things are, and like what things are at what level and what plane and what depth from everything else. And I'm sure this is still being iterated on heavily, because that kind of game readability is crucial. And that seems to be what they have prioritized, because like, you look at the shape language of this thing, for example, this is supposed to be like a car, right? Like, or a truck, or a thing that doesn't put. Look at the way it's put together and designed, like these very readable, simple shapes. So there's no ornamentation, no complications. You can tell exactly what this thing is. So there's this very minimalist. Yes, we'll have this decoration here to do a little bit of world building for the universe that we're in, but minimize it. Like, keep it to a bare minimum. Like, textures on the walls, sure, but nothing to distract from the like plain blue surface here that tells us something about the shape of the environment. Like, and that's all stuff that, like, when I first saw it, it was kind of jarring. Like, something about it felt a little bit uncanny, because you have this hyper sparse, like really just minimalist, squarish level aesthetic with like frills and bells and whistles sort of plopped on top of it most of the time, or like tucked out of the way where it can't distract anyone or cause any trouble. And then you have that juxtaposed with especially the spell effects, which are just 100% cartoon. Like, that's when we really get back into cartoon territory, is these ability effects that are going down in various places are just, they look straight out of like Wild Rift on mobile, like League of Legends mobile version or something like that. Which is interesting. Like, that's an interesting way to mix things. I'm not sure it's that successful, because it really feels a lot like these abilities just don't belong in the world that they're being cast into. And that may be part of the point. Like, that may be part of making them stand out, so that you always look at that and go, oh, okay, that's clearly not meant to be here. And they're doing that with colors as well, as you can see in all these screenshots. Even though, like, you have greens and stuff like that in this environment, you can still see that this particular shade of green, that particular shade of bluish, cyan, teal, whatever, they stand out. Like, even this brown and gray blob, which is probably a smoke screen of some kind, it stands out in the environment it's in, which helps with readability. So that's all very nice. But yeah, it's an interesting set of aesthetics that they've landed on here, because it's so beholden to so many other things. Like, clearly there's an Overwatch influence. Clearly they're doing the science fiction / fantasy hybrid thing a little bit, where we use science fiction terminology to justify what's clearly like fantasy abilities, like healing fields and like whatever the hell that is, and things like that. But then on the other hand, you also have this sort of sparse modern military shooter environment aesthetic that's being plopped over top of all of it. Like, this is a CSGO aesthetic when it comes to designing the environment, right? This is not the environment that you would imagine a high-powered super fantasy future civilization with magic powers would design. This looks like industrial design a la 2020 somewhere. And that's an interesting set of mixed aesthetics and mixed visual ideas. That's sort of, on the one hand, it's unique in the details, but it looks incredibly generic in the broad term. Like, when you take a broad look at it, it's like, well, this looks like every other this looks like just a mashup of every other goddamn video game. What's unique about this? But then the particular blend, the particular mix that they've landed on is actually kind of unique. Like, it really doesn't look quite like anything else. It just looks sort of vaguely similar to a lot of other stuff, which I find fascinating. Now, remains to be seen whether there's any actual lore behind this game. I would imagine there is, because Riot absolutely cannot bloody help themselves. And if there is, I'll return and talk more about that stuff. But for the moment, I just wanted to do like a little quick reaction, basically, to the screenshots that have been leaked so far, and some of the thoughts that have fired off in my head in terms of where the aesthetics of the game are trying to go. And I'm looking forward to someone coming up with a grand unified theory of when this fits in the League of Legends timeline. Because I'm sure, like, I would be 0% surprised if they pull the rug out from under us and have a Pulsefire skin show up in this game. That would not surprise me at all. That would be very funny. But probably not in the initial reveal. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, like, comment, subscribe, and the reason why every YouTuber on the face of the earth tells you to hit those buttons is because YouTube tracks how many people hit the buttons, and if lots of people hit the buttons, or like some nice percentage of people hit the buttons, then YouTube goes, oh, that video is probably something we should show to anyone who isn't subscribed to him at some point in the history of the world. And if people don't hit the buttons, then YouTube goes, well, that's clearly garbage content for asshole idiot people who never want to see anything else this man has ever made ever again, so we'll bury it and bury it in the ground, and then bury the shovel as well so no one can dig it up. That's more or less how YouTube works. So therefore, if you want to hit the like button, that actually genuinely does help a bit. Outside of that, I have a Patreon, I have a merchandise store, I have a tip jar. Those are all available in the description, and if you want to avail yourself of any of those, I'd be very grateful for the help. Like, even a $1 donation actually matters quite a bit, and that's something I try to emphasize at the end of my videos, is that for online content creators, like that $1 donation, $2 donation, that tiny pledge on Patreon, that can literally be the same as thousands of views on a video, like in terms of the kinds of money it brings in versus advertising. So even if you don't want to support me, that's completely okay. Don't even worry about it. But in general, if there are online content creators whose work you enjoy, please consider supporting them directly with whatever you can, whenever you can, because even those small donations matter a lot more than you think, especially to smaller content creators or niche content creators who don't have much of an audience, but who are creating interesting content that you would like to see more of. Like, that stuff really matters. Anyway, have I pitched everything? Oh yeah, I also have a second channel. I do Let's Plays over there. Art analysis on the games I play. Things like that. You can go there as well. I think that's it. I think that's all of the things I'm supposed to plug at the end of my videos, because that's the job of a YouTuber. So, if you haven't enjoyed this video, dislike button. Clicking the thing and then it's okay. Anyway, I'm gonna go have dinner now. I'm very hungry. Bye.